Hello everybody, I am LIFECYCLE from Computer Science and Engineering Department from Rajalakshmi Institute of Technology. So here I am going to give exploration on internet programming on servlet architecture. So the subject is about server-side programming. So what is server-side programming? Whenever user gives the input, the response will be done by the server. So there are the other server-side scripting languages. So Servlet is one of the server-side scripting languages based on Java. What this servlet will contain? So what the servlet does is, basically the servlet does request and response operation. For that it traditionally uses HTTP protocol. So this is the outline of the today's lecture. What are the features of Servlet? Then what are the interfaces and classes available in Servlet package? So the Servlet is available in a package called javax.servlet, and we are going to see some of the methods available in Servlet. So usually there are buzzwords like applet and servlet. So applet can run on the client browsers, whereas servlets can run on web browsers. So that is the main comparison between servlets and applets. So applet is a client-side programming, where servlet is a server-side programming. So usually if you are using a applet is a platform dependent thing, whereas whenever you access an applet, it consumes more bandwidth. So the developers have gone to servlets instead of applets used for responding from the server side. So as I said, a servlet is a small Java program which is running on the server side. So it works on the principle of request and response. So when a client requests a web server for a particular resource, then that request will be forwarded to the servlet. Then the servlet will respond to the client's request. So there will be a servlet container at the web server. So the servlet container role is to identify what is the corresponding servlet to give the response for the client's request. So usually a servlet runs on the server side. So usually the servlet is written on Java language. So usually the main the servlet uses to connect with the database and evaluate the expressions. So where we can use the servlet? Servlet can be used where there is a necessity of processing the client's request. So like shopping cart, any e-commerce application, servlets can be useful. So as I said before, the servlet has some of the features like it reduces the bandwidth required to download or process a request, whereas applets consume more bandwidth. And browser compatibility also, servlet does not require any specific browser to get run, and you don't need any plugin to run the servlet. Another important thing is the same response can be done with CGI. The implementation can be implementation can be executed with the help of Perl programming in CGI. But the problem is, whenever a client requests a particular resource, a separate process will be created for each and every request. Whereas in servlets, when a client is requesting for a particular resource in a web server, there will be only one process will be get created. Under that, so many threads will get created. The main thing is when a different number of processes get created, it cannot share the memory. So it requires different memory to be get created. Whereas at the servlet uses threading. So a common address space can be useful. So this is the servlet communication path where a client is requesting a particular resource through a HTML form. Then it will be sent to the Java enabled web server. So in the web server, the servlet container will be there. The servlet container will find out the corresponding servlet and executes the request. So usually the servlet will have three methods. So what are the methods? Are the init and service and destroy. So once the container gets the request from the web server, so it actually processes the servlet configurations. So initially the servlet object will get created and the object gets initialized. Then it will be put onto the service method. The service method is responsible for executing the response. So the response needs to be multi-threaded. So, and the third step is, after processing the client's request, the servlet can go to the state called destroy, where the memory which is created earlier will get released. So what are the methods which are available in servlet? Destroy, get servlet config, get servlet info, init, service. So the destroy, init, service, all these methods will be get called with the help of the servlet container. This is the servlet architecture. So when there is a web server, so the client will give the request with the help of the web browser. So the request will be sent as an HTTP request. The HTTP request will be sent to the web server. Then the web server forwards the HTTP request to the servlet container. So the servlet container is a repository of containing more number of servlets. So the corresponding servlet get matched and the request get processed and will get do the evaluation of the given input. So what the client might requested, the client might requested for validating the user and password. So it will be available in a database. So and then the next servlet will get establish the connection with the database, and the database will return the query result back to the servlet. Then the servlet responds to the web server and the web server forwards the HTTP response back to the client. Yes. So this is the servlet class hierarchy. So there is a servlet class. Under that there are two types of servlet. One is the generic servlet, another one is the HTTP servlet. So what is the use of generic servlet is? Generic servlets are used to create platform independent and protocol independent applications. Whereas the HTTP servlets are used to create HTTP specific applications. So in a servlet class, the servlet interface contains these methods: init, service, destroy, get servlet config, get servlet info. The get servlet config method is used to return the object which is created at the created by the servlet container. Yes. So the servlet interface has the other methods like HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. So the HTTP servlet class contains two objects. One is the request object, another one is the response object. So the HTTP servlet class contains the methods do delete, do head, do options, do put and do trace. So the do head method is used to give the response as only the header will be only the header will be sent. Do options method returns what are the HTTP options or what are the HTTP options which are supported by the server. Then do put will be typically stores the files on the server, and there is also another method called do get. So do get method is used to send the information to the server, and the server used to get the client's data or the parameters through the do get method. So do put will be used when if you want to send and retrieve the request and response, do put will be useful. And another significant difference between do get and do put is do get is used for only if you want to send a little amount of data or a small amount of data, then you can go for do get. Whereas do put will be useful when, do post will be useful when if you are sending enormous amount of data. Now, there are two main classes under HTTP servlet. One is the HTTP request class, another one is HTTP servlet class, HTTP response class. So, HTTP request method contains the methods like get cookies, get local name, get local address, get local port, get parameter. So, most often we use get parameter method in order to get the client's request. The get local port returns the port number of the user or the request which we have received. Get local address returns the IP address on which the request was received. The get local name returns the host name of the client or the request which we have received. Then get cookies method returns the array of cookie value which are created by the server. Now, few more methods are there. Add cookie. Next one is get output stream, get writer, then set content type and get content type. So the add cookie method is used to create cookies and to store in a form of an array. And get output stream is a method which is used to get the output stream for the byte oriented data. So it will be in a form of a binary data. What does the get writer does? Get writer does will get a handle for writing the data in a form of a character. Then set content type. Then set content type is used to set the content type of the response. So usually the content type response is going to be text/HTML. The other content types are also there like text/XML, text/CSS, text/application. So the application can be MS Word, Excel and PowerPoint. The next one is get content type. So get content type is used to get the content type of the user. This is the typical servlet example. So how to create a servlet is to create a class, servlet class. The servlet class should extend a class called HTTP servlet. So any servlet which you are creating, that should extend a class called HTTP servlet. And it should follow with an method either do get, do put or do post based on the client's request and what the response you are going to do. So here the thing, an important thing which you have to note down is what is the client's request. If the client requests in the form of get method, then you have to write the response in do get. If the client's request is of a post, then you have to put do post here. Then now the do post method contains the request and response object. So when you are creating request and response object, the corresponding class should be given. So the request objects class is going to be HTTP servlet request, and the response objects class is going to be of type is going to be HTTP servlet response. And these method do get, do post, do put, all these three methods will throw an exception called servlet exception, and it also might throw an IO exception. So it should be explicitly throws, so that what is meant by servlet exception is, if the servlet cannot be created on the servlet container in the web server, then there is an exception called servlet exception. And if the method do get or do post or do put is not able to write the content or read the content, then there will be an exception called IO exception. So first you have to set the content type if you want to send the response. So the response should be written with the help of the response object. So res, that is what the response object name, res.setContentType of text/HTML. So this indicates my response is going to be of a text, a main text, and of HTML format. And then in order to send the response should be written as a character, that is character oriented data. So for that you have to create a class called, that is you have to use the class called print writer. For that you have to create an object. Then with the help of the response object, so because whatever the response we are going to write, that should be written with the help of the response object. So response object dot get writer. So the get writer will create a handle for writing the data onto the response object. So hereafter I can use the out object, that is the print writer's object, to write the response onto the client. So what the response we have created here. So if this servlet is called, so it is going to simply show simple servlet output. So the response is going to be a text message. Okay. So now, so out.println has the HTML tags. The same thing can be written in each and every line. So then first you can create a HTML tag, then you can create a title tag, then followed by a body tag, then you can give whatever the text or the response which you want to do. Then all those things can be given. Then you have to close the tags. So finally you have to close the print writer's object. So out.close will close the writer's object. Now how to execute it? So before executing it, you have to create a file called deployment descriptor. So what this deployment descriptor does, deployment descriptor contains information for the web server to execute and call the web servlet. So the web servlet name, or the servlet name, the servlet class, and where is this servlet is stored inside the web server. So that should be given inside the deployment descriptor. Now deployment descriptor should be created inside a folder called web-inf. So I will tell you later how to create that. So this is what my web server contains. My web server is installed inside the program files. Inside that I have an Apache Foundation. So inside that I have the sample programs are there under first examples. You can create your own projects under this folder. And inside that, and there is a folder called Tomcat. So inside the Tomcat there is a folder called Web Apps. So all your projects should be created inside the Web Apps folder. So here we have created a project called First Examples, that is there inside the Web Apps folder. Now inside that you have to create a folder called web-inf. Inside the web-inf there should be a file named web.xml. So this web.xml file will be called as deployment descriptor. So what this file is going to contain? This file is going to contain the servlet name, servlet class. My servlet name is going to be welcome1 and the servlet class name is going to be welcome servlet. Now after doing this, so the web.xml file will contain the XML tags. So the XML tag starts with web-app and it should have a servlet tag. Inside the servlet tag there should be a servlet name and that should be closed. After creating the servlet, then servlet class also should be created. So inside the servlet class you have to type the servlet class name. After doing this you have to close the servlet. Then you have to open a tag called servlet mapping. So inside the servlet mapping you have to give the, once again you have to give the servlet name, then followed by you have to provide a URL pattern. So this URL pattern indicates where that servlet is located. So whenever a client is requesting for a particular resource on the web server, then the server will forward that request to the servlet container. So by default the servlet container go and checks inside the web apps folder with the following project name. Then inside the inside that should be a web INF folder. Inside that we have a deployment descriptor. So if your deployment descriptor is not defined properly, then you may not be able to access the proper servlet. Now how to run the servlet? So first of all you have to start Apache Tomcat. That is, you have to go inside the Apache Tomcat, then there is a folder called bin. Inside that there is a file called startup.bat. It is a batch file, you have to run it. Then after executing that you can open your web browser. In that you have to type http:// that is the protocol that you are going to use. Then the local host. If your web server is running on your machine in a local machine, then you can type localhost or 127.0.0.1. Otherwise you can type where that Apache software is running, where your web server is running. That IP address should be given here. So that IP address :8080, that is the default port number for the HTTP service. Then followed by the project name should be given. Then followed by the project name, you have to provide from where you are going to call the servlet. Suppose if I am having a HTML call welcome servlet.html that contain a button. So if that button is clicked, it will call the servlet. So the servlet gets executed inside the servlet container, then the response will be get notified. This is what the servlet responds. Thank you.